Welcome to Byte Size, a series where we talk to traffic and mobility experts, discuss innovation, and highlight business leaders within transport and city planning. Hello there, my name is Emily Bobbis, and welcome back to another episode of the Byte Size podcast. So, today's episode is all about micromobility, bike sharing, shared mobility, and kind of a little bit more aspirational in terms of the future of what our cities might look like. And joining me on this conversation today for the podcast is Monica Zarafu. So Monica is an expert in innovative transport solutions with over 25 years of academic, local government and industry practice in Australia and overseas. Her background is transport engineering with a bachelor's degree from the Polytechnic Institute Bucharest, which is in Romania, and a master's by research in the built environment from the University of Technology, Sydney. Monica's research of autonomous mass transit systems brought her a number of scholarships and awards, including a scholarship from the CSIRO and the first annual Martin Lowson Paper Award, conferred by the US Advanced Transit Association. She has given presentations at prestigious forums and international conferences such as the International Urban Planning and Environment Symposium, the Healthy City Conference in Geelong, Victoria, and the Australian Walking and Cycling Conference in Newcastle, and of course the podcast City Conference in Silicon Valley, the USA. In recent years, Monica has specialised in bike sharing and e-mobility. She founded BYKKO, the first Australian enterprise specialised in research, development and the operations of intelligent bike sharing. BYKKO is a fully integrated e-mobility vendor, operator and software provider that supports all e-mobility vehicles whilst providing full network planning and design expertise, data management and a future-proof technology roadmap. Monica is a champion of public e-bike sharing and a transport system that is easy to implement, environmentally friendly, and cost-effective. So, hi Monica, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Hi Emily, thanks so much for having me today.
So, the usual question that I ask everybody who comes onto the podcast is, how did you come to work in transport and mobility?
Do you want the long version or the short version?
I guess you can take your pick. I've got time. So.
I suppose I was always attracted by emerging fields and new ideas. So back in my university years, I chose transport technologies engineering at Polytechnic University in Bucharest, as it was a newly created faculty that combine electronics and telecommunications with transport technologies. So I found this quite interesting. But then my master thesis was about marketing and shipping containers, which was quite a different subject to anything I'd been studying in uni. Anyway, after I graduated, I worked a few years as transport engineer. Then I became the general manager of a freight forwarding company in Romania, but with headquarters in New York. In 2008, I moved to Australia with my family, and in 2010, I went back to school and I started my master by research at the University of Technology, Sydney. So my research was obviously around transport, and this time was personal rapid transit systems. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the term, but they are small, automated, driverless pods for mass transit, not individual cars. And my supervisor, Dr. Gary Glazebrook, one of the best transport planner we had, he's retired now, working in the early stages of his career with Dr. Arthur Ernest Bishop. I'm not sure if you heard about Dr. Bishop, but he was an Australian inventor and visionary that founded Austrans, the world's first group rapid transit system, mass transit rail system with very small vehicles, with 9 seats vehicles, lightweight, quiet, energy efficient, and fast traveling. So I still dream that one day we will have such an amazing mode of public transport. And during my time at UTS, I had an incredible opportunity to be part of a collaborative research program under the CSIRO Climate Change Adaptation Flagship Cluster, looking at various land use and transport scenarios to estimate the environmental, health, and economic benefits of different transport technologies. And this is how I become acutely aware of the need to start taking actions to cut transport emissions before it's too late. And this is how I become kind of obsessed with personal mobility. In 2012, the term micromobility wasn't even invented. However, the bike sharing phenomenon was growing overseas, and I saw a big gap in this space in Australia. And this is the reason I decided to start the movement here.
So part of the reason why I wanted to chat to you today as well is because part of your as you mentioned, this idea of you saw this gap in micromobility, which didn't exist as a term at the time. You started BYKKO. So did you just want to go through a little bit about what BYKKO is and where the idea came from and why you started it?
Sure. BYKKO is today a fully integrated e-mobility vendor, operator, and software provider that supports all e-mobility vehicles while providing full network planning and design expertise, data management, and customer service. Our built-in telematics, API capabilities, and robust security make what we think is the best choice for station-based e-bike sharing and e-mobility. Since moving to Australia, I was very intrigued by the lack of investment in public bike sharing systems. Outside Melbourne and Brisbane, no other Australian city had bike sharing a couple of years ago, in contrast to Europe, where there was bike sharing in every major city. I researched the global bike sharing phenomenon, the existing business models, and the barriers to bike sharing, especially in the Australian context. As I told you earlier, I spent a couple of years here researching sustainable transport modes and the relationship between the built environment and travel behavior. One of the findings was there is a very strong correlation between built environment and the travel behavior. Here in Australia, we have urban sprawl. Our large cities are spread out, which means increased travel distances, relatively low densities, especially when compared with other global cities. We have a very segregated land use and what is perceived as unsafe cycling environment, either because of the lack of proper infrastructure or because of the driving culture. All of these are major barriers to bike sharing. However, on the other hand, another finding was that majority of trips are short distance trips. Over 50% of trips are less than 5 kilometers. This is across all trips, not just commuting, shopping, recreational, education, business-related trips. So the short nature of the majority of trips provides actually a great incentive for promoting bike sharing and shared mobility. Personal mobility devices, bikes, scooters, other devices are an excellent solution for short distance trips. My eureka moment was when I tried an electric bike at a show in Europe, and I thought I found the solution for the most barriers to cycling here. I was sure there are many people like me, especially women and not so fit people or not so skilled cyclists, who will be attracted by an electric bike. You can do, your exercise while still handling work chores without getting all sweaty at work or on your way to appointments. So it's a social activity. Cycling is social, it's reliable, and you can easily plan your trip and the travel time. You can travel longer distances at a constant speed on an electric bike, which will help mitigate the conflict between drivers and cyclists. So you will feel safer and encouraged to cycle more and more often. Therefore, more cyclists bring safety in numbers. So this is how I decided to tackle one of the biggest challenges Australia law for cars, finding the perfect car parking space with an electric bike. However, electric bikes, as you know, are very expensive. You can pay for good electric bike the same amount as for a second-hand car. So with e-bike sharing, we eliminated another barrier to cycling, making accessible, affordable, easy to use, and someone else does the service and maintenance for you.
Amazing. I definitely resonate with the idea of, particularly in Sydney, where Sydney is not necessarily known as being very bike friendly.
Yeah, it's
So,
not.
it's really interesting and really cool to see that somebody at least is trying to come up with some kind of solution to that. Probably before some of the other major players came in that we've seen. Just backtracking a bit as well. So we talked about micromobility, but we probably should actually define micromobility. So are you able to just kind of, give a little bit of an elevator pitch about what is micromobility?
The term actually was coined by a Romanian American tech analyst and visionary, if you heard about Horace Dediu in 2017. So, asking an interview about the meaning of this word, Mr. Dediu said that micromobility should be defined around what is singular about its purpose, moving a human being. So I love this definition. Its purpose is to offer maximum freedom of mobility, the mobility component in the world, and its minimalist micro is to do so in the least impactful way, small footprint, small size, lightweight. Micromobility is still a new term, so I'm pretty sure its definition is still evolving, but it's broadly accepted that micromobility means transportation over relatively short distances provided by generally small and lightweight powered vehicles such as electric bikes, scooters, other personal mobility devices that run on charged batteries. In most markets today, micromobility practically means shared e-bikes and shared e-scooters. Other micromobility vehicles could potentially include very small cars, but personally, I prefer to exclude motor vehicles from this category.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned it a little bit in there with the mentioning of bike sharing, similar to BYKKO, I guess, is in a city where a lot of people, or car is king, I should say, particularly in Sydney. How important is this idea of micromobility or shared mobility in a city?
In my opinion, share mobility, it's having a transformative impact on a city by enhancing multimodal transport, by increasing transport accessibility, and obviously ultimately reducing car ownership and vehicle kilometers traveled. Because this is where the impact is. By replacing a significant part of vehicle kilometer traveled with active travel, we can deliver health and economic benefits to any city. Recent research, I have some data here, shows that by replacing private car trips and public transport with cycling trips leads to increased physical activity, substantial increase of 550 to 800 metabolic equivalent tasks of minutes of physical activity per week. Electric bikes are found to be ridden twice as far and twice as often as push bikes, with the biggest impact on females and senior citizens. So by encouraging e-mobility, we can really have a positive impact on the public health, because also research shows that regular cyclists have lower chance of getting cancer or dying, or they are less likely to have heart diseases. Also, on an e-bike, you can travel. We measure we can travel 8.5 kilometers in 15 minutes. So this will expand the catchment radius of a transit node enormously when compared to the 800 meter for 15 minutes of walking. So we can have our 15-minute cities by providing these e-mobility hubs around every train station for a fraction of building other transport infrastructure or additional car parking. And share mobility is not only about bike sharing or micromobility. It includes various forms of car sharing, ride sharing, carpooling, van pooling, on-demand ride services, It can also include microtransit services, which can supplement fixed route bus and rail services. After all, mass transit is macro scale share mobility. So innovation in this field is more important than ever.
Yeah, wow. It's so speaking of some of the benefits which you've mentioned, so there's, decreased car ownership, greater accessibility to transport assets. What role does micromobility play in sustainability or building more sustainable cities? We often hear this idea of smart cities or what is it? It's like Sydney 2050. I think they might have moved that now to like Sydney 2080 or something like that. But what role do you think it plays in those kind of visions?
I truly believe that e-mobility could have a significant impact in making our cities greener, safer, healthier, and more livable when properly planned. A recent McKinsey report estimates that micromobility could encompass all passenger trips of less than 8 kilometers, which account for as much as 50 to 60% of today's total passengers across the world travel in China, European Union, United States. This is huge impact. It's hardly ideal to have, in our cities, drivers cycling, looking for parking, near beaches, hospitals, entertainment venues, and so on. So encouraging smart micro-mobility trips to and between such attractions or from park and ride facilities or from public transport node can enhance the appeal of micro-mobility. However, in my opinion, to be truly sustainable, any micro-mobility player shall consider all aspects of a sustainable transport mode and social, environmental, economic impact they bring on each community. We believe in connecting community, which means we treat the non-users and the general public with the same respect and consideration we treat our paying customers. So we spend months working with all major stakeholders in a community before launching the program, and we design our networks for the unexperienced cyclists. And this is also important because the general view is the driver's eye view of our city. So most people believe cycling is dangerous. For some cities, or for some parts of a city, that is true. Cycling is too challenging for bike share to succeed. And when I say cycling, it's any micromobility mode. But in other cities or in other parts of city, quiet back streets, parks and cycleways, shared paths, they provide a continuous network of micromobility space, which an unexperienced user can navigate the entire city with no stress at all.
Definitely. The next question is a little bit more kind of general than it is relating to transport and mobility. I was having a conversation for another podcast episode with a lovely lady called Lauren Burke, and we brought up this statistic that in the transport industry, it's estimated that only 16.9% of roles are taken by women, and that's inclusive of whether you're a truck driver or in admin or HR, or basically everything. So it kind of got me questioning, as another woman in transport and a women-owned transport business, what do you think could be done to get more women involved in transport and mobility schemes like what you've done with BYKKO?
Creating a more woman-friendly transport ecosystem is the main reason I started BYKKO. If we can make the infrastructure accessible and it feels safe, women will start to switch more trips from cars to e-bikes. E-bike sharing and micromobility is only the first step in the right direction. If we want to see more women in transport and mobility, we need to see more women using share mobility, which can then in turn help bring a wave of new users. But it's imperative we create infrastructure that is guided by women's needs and habits. and then hiring women to use their creativity and innovation to design for women products and services is one of the ways to change, this male-dominated mobility industry. The driving force behind sustainable transport and mobility, in my opinion, resonates very well with a woman's ideal, taking care of families, taking care of our cities, our communities, making them safer and healthier. So gender diversity, it's important in all industries, but in transport specifically, it's a fundamental necessity. We also need strong female role models and mentors in industry, and we need more visibility of the existing players in this industry. This is why I'm so grateful for your invitation today and the opportunity to talk with you about shared mobility, because you also have an incredible story that very few people probably know about. No? You co-founded one of the very first Australian dogless bike-sharing startups out of University of Sydney in 2018, no?
Yes, yeah. Well, I can't take all the credit. I was part of the founding team. Yes.
Yeah, it's something because I saw recent statistics, and in share mobility, only 3% are leading roles by women.
Yes, particularly still, even though I'm not in the share biking industry anymore, I'm still in a leadership role in a startup in the tech industry, relying on transport, which is, I think, the trifecta of things that have very little women involvement. So the problem is still there. And then, of course, on your comments, the pleasure is absolutely mine to be interviewing you and other women that work in this space, because I guess, like you said, you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
So going back to the idea of sustainable cities, we've talked about a lot of aspects. So the idea of accessibility, car ownership, women in the built environment, and how we can kind of increase the how infrastructure is built in a way that it reflects maybe the needs of different genders better. What does your ideal future city look like? I know it's a very broad question.
Look, from a transport point of view, I would really like to see a revolution in public transport and e-mobility during my lifetime. For me, the ideal future city, it's a city where advanced technology is available for large masses, not just for the few lucky ones that could afford that. Driverless cars, electric cars, even hybrid cars, they won't deliver sustainable cities. They will lock the city life into a perpetual race for space and privileges. Futuristic public transport and friendly neighborhoods will deliver what I call a smart city. Having this personal group rapid transit pods for mass transit, and then the streets designed for people at a human scale would be my ideal, future city. A city where kids can play safely on streets. Do you know what is one of the biggest fears we install in our kids from young age? Is the fear of cars. From crossing the road when they are very young to the risk as cyclists when they are teenagers, and then the risk of having a car accident when they get their license. So I'm sure every parent has a stay away from cars teaching book. I would really like to move away from that.
Yeah, I actually hadn't ever thought of it that way, that we kind of, I've seen pictures as well where it shows how much space we give to pedestrians and allocate it to shared mobility like bike lanes, etc., and then how much is actually given to a car. It was like a really funny image where they'd kind of replace the roads with like a really big chasm, and it was this idea of if you step onto it, you're kind of dead. But yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, so that was really interesting.
Yeah, this is how we live. This is how we build our cities. So yeah, it is time to change. It's time to change because the new generations are totally more into shared economy, shared mobility, using technology rather than, owning 2-3 cars per household. So we need to design cities for them.
Definitely. Well, Monica, thank you so much for chatting to me today. It's been really interesting talking about micromobility and sustainability, but also a little bit more aspirational in terms of, in general, what amazing cities might look like in the future.
Thanks so much, Emily. It was a pleasure talking to you.
If you'd like to know more about Monica or BYKKO, you can visit their website, which is byko.com.au. BYKKO is spelt BYKKO. And of course, if you'd like to know more about Byte Size or Compass IoT, the company that runs this podcast, you can visit our website, which is www.compassiot.com.au. Until next time.